Hello, it's Writing Wednesday, and we are live from New York. Um, I'm down in the hallway in my hotel because the Wi-Fi sucks in the room, so I'm going to do the best I can. There's a bunch of big parties, and it is what it is. So, life, what are you going to do? So I'm going to hold this with one hand until I get tired. So welcome to Writing Wednesday. And I got a letter from Barbara, who asked a question about side characters. What about, and tell me if you can hear me if you're watching, what about something on side characters? I get asked by my students things like, should I name side characters, and how important are side characters, and how do you decide how big a part side characters play? And should the protagonist have at least one best friend side character? That's a really good question, and I'm going to answer it tonight. It's probably 4 o'clock in LA. It's 7:45 here in New York. I've been having a great time. Had lunch with my agent. Talked about matters literary. It was very fun. So side characters. What is a side character? Well, if you think of secondary characters being anybody who your protagonist deals with, then that's most of the people in your novel. If you think of side characters as being the less important characters, what you would call tertiary characters, or what you would call incidental characters, I'll talk about both of them, because why not? Why shouldn't I? So first let's talk about secondary or tertiary characters, incidental characters. The mailman, the person you buy the donuts from, somebody the character meets at a party before they meet the person that they're there to meet. Should you name side characters? Sometimes you don't know how important somebody's going to be until you've written their scenes and you've written past their scenes, and you don't know. Maybe it's going to turn out that that's going to be an extremely important character in your book. You don't know yet. So the most important thing to do is to not only give them a name. If you know it's not going to be a primary character, at least a first name. It doesn't need to be first and last. And some salient feature about them that a reader can remember. If they are impatient, if they are, if they have a mohawk, if they are missing an arm, if they are talking to themselves as they're digging through the trash. But something that isn't even all that salient, because somebody is talking to themselves while they're digging the trash is pretty common. But if they're talking to themselves when they're supposed to be doing something else, then that absent-minded character, you'll give them a character tag. So instead of saying Barney, you'll say the mechanic, you'll say the one-legged man, the homeless guy with a cat on his shoulder, so Catman, and it'll be easy to recognize them through their character tag. It's important always to give your characters, secondary characters, hey Alyssa, to give your secondary characters names that start with different initials. Too many A's makes it hard for the reader to remember Alicia from Alice, from Amy. It's like it's all the same person to the reader. So to try to give your characters names that are well spaced, some long, some short. memorable names and a trait or two. The one with the broken nose, you'll remember the broken nose guy. You'll remember the woman in the leopard coat. So something to make them vivid and memorable without having to, develop them overly much if they're just going to be secondary characters. I think that a lot of the times incidental characters are there to propel the protagonist to a certain kind of realization, that they would see something or think of something that they might not have thought of otherwise. So they have a function. They let them think differently. There's a significant encounter. That's one kind of side character. The person somebody's in kind of a narcissistic swoon, and you get somebody coming in from the outside. It's like, wake up! That's a useful character, even if you never see them again. Some characters return, it's the same doorman, it's the same waiter, that same old man waiter. And when he's not there, you'll notice him. So these are, the thing about fiction is that it's not linear. It's not, especially long fiction, it's not A to B to C to D. That these characters add richness and the sense of life going on, that it's not just a construct in the writer's head, or it's not just about this, there's a little breeze now. It's not just about this one character swimming in mid-ocean, that it's going to be about life, and life is full of people. So having incidental characters who are vivid and yet don't take over is really important. If you know that, say, your novel is going to be about a big crime that's going to take place, say, in Las Vegas, and you're setting it up, and you have your character, now they're 9 years old, and they're in Albuquerque, New Mexico. You might want to be careful about having too many secondary characters and digging in too deep into Albuquerque when your story is going to take place in Las Vegas. Have the ones you need, but try to focus, try not to just keep expanding outwards, because you'll have to trim that, you'll have to cut that eventually. What else can we say? The most important thing about secondary characters, if you think of characters that your protagonist interacts with as secondary, and then characters that those characters interact with, those are tertiary characters. And you don't want to spend too much time on stories that aren't about your protagonist. And something I see with student writing is where, and not even student writing, but intermediate writing, is that the protagonist ends up being a tourist in other people's lives. If it's not about your protagonist, if it's not a story that directly affects them, but it's them seeing somebody else's tragedy, why don't you make it about one of the people that this is actually happening to, instead of this person that it's not really their story? So when you notice you're telling the story of a secondary character a lot, and their relationship with tertiary characters, think about whether you've got the right protagonist to tell that story. Try not to, the tertiary characters are the ones that you're just going to, it's the lady in the leopard coat or the guy with the broken nose. Secondary characters are characters your protagonist interacts with, and they're going to be extremely important. It's like, how important is it to have here's the question, how important is it to for the protagonist to have at least one best friend or side character. They don't need a best friend. That's like situation comedy. In what happens in theater, in film, in television, is characters have best friends because the dramatist cannot tell the reader what's going on in the mind of the protagonist, of your point of view character. That's the great thing about fiction, is that I can tell you what's going on in the character's mind, so you don't need them to run and have a best friend that they can turn to and go blah, 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 blah. I don't care. We don't need it. But what happens in fiction is you need conflict. You know, so you do need characters, other characters besides your protagonist. So these are not necessarily going to be your best friend. They could be the person who's making your life hell. And more likely, that's the necessary second person, is the person who's making your life difficult. And the people around you play different parts in your story, if I'm the protagonist. There is the secondary character could be a best friend, could be a colleague, could be a kid, could be, you know, anyone in the story. Sometimes a secondary character is used to act as the Greek chorus. Like if you have a crazy character who just does whatever they want to do, whatever springs to mind, and then you have a character in the story who stands in lieu of the reader or society. You have the sane character who's going like, I wouldn't do that if I was you. So that's one important. Often in literature you'll see that character. That's Sancho Panza. You know, he's the best friend who's going like, I wouldn't do that if I was you. But Don Quixote is not that person. On the other hand, you can have a secondary character who is often used is the sidekick. And what the sidekick does is sometimes they're the sane one, and then sometimes they're crazier than the protagonist. Hey, Arlene. Hard to hear me. Yeah, it's real noisy in here. I couldn't find a quiet room. They just don't have anything that I could get into, so here we are. You have a character like what I call the running dog sidekick, which is a character. Audio is not working. Oh, darn. How we doing? Is that still bad? Okay, testing. Got it? Sidekick? Can you hear me? Yeah? So the sidekick, the running dog sidekick, is a character who's more extreme. All right. A character who's more extreme than another character, especially if you have bad guys. You have bad guys. You have like your lead antagonist who could be all gentlemanly, but they've got a sidekick who will break your arm. So the bad guy can be all gentlemanly and send out his running dog, and he's the one who threatens you. He's the one who's crazier, but you know that it's not really him. He's an extension of the primary bad guy. Having a friend is a good thing, but they shouldn't be too much alike. They should put pressure on one another, especially the secondary character puts pressure on the main character. If you have an adventurous character, then the friend would be, let's do our homework. I don't want to go to that party. Oh, come on. You'll love it. So you always want that contrast. Sometimes you have someone who just stands in for what a sane person would expect. Sometimes they're the character who has you have the conflict with, or they cause the conflict. When the protagonist is the mom and the secondary character is the kid who is always getting into trouble, and the mom has to deal. Then that's a secondary character who's putting pressure on the main character. Sometimes a character will help you. Now, there's somebody asked the question, if you have a character who's useful, like the useful computer guy in every stupid movie ever, do you need them to come back? Is it Deus Ex Machina if you have a character who fixes your car just at the right point and then splits? I don't think you have to bring them back. I don't want my car fixed twice, but there has to be some kind of thematic reason that character comes to your protagonist to save them. It has to be likely, it has to be earned, or it has to earn itself after the fact. You're only allowed one coincidence in a novel, one big coincidence, and it usually is towards the front. You can't solve a story problem with a coincidence or some lucky break, But there can be lucky breaks. A novel has lots of room for lucky breaks and unlucky breaks, and things that look like a good idea to begin with and then turn out horribly, things that look like never going to work, and then that person saves you. That's life. That's the way it is. But it's very interesting to have those Greek chorus type characters who kind of reflect society's values and tell the character, this is what we expect in society, and then the character goes off and does something quite different. Let's see, what else do we have? So, no, you don't need the best friend. Any two characters that are too much alike, cut, kill, get rid of one. Any time, I remember reading a book where there was the surfer who was going to, middle-aged, over-the-hill surfer who was going to surf the big waves of Northern California. And then there was the over-the-hill, middle-aged photographer who was going to go shoot pictures of the middle-aged surfer surfing the last waves. And then there was the middle-aged, over-the-hill cop whose land they were going to have to trespass on to get to the big waves of Northern California. So there were three characters who were basically the same character. So get rid of two and just have the one. Don't double up on your characters. Let's see. So secondary characters can push a character in a certain direction. They're useful. But watch out for a story where your character is a tourist in other people's lives. So is there any questions you have for me on the subject of secondary characters? So they can be more extreme, they can be less extreme. You don't have to name them, but give them a tag. So we recognize when we see that woman with the leopard coat walking her dog, oh, there she is again. So it makes a real world populated by real people. When there are no secondary characters or just characters in passing, I don't believe the story. I don't believe that it's real, because real people live in a real world that's full of other people, and so naturally they would come in. But you wouldn't necessarily have dialogue with them unless there's conflict, unless there's a reason for dialogue, and we've talked about that. So people should have different names, start with different letters. People who speak have a different ways of speaking, mannerisms, so that we recognize them. So any other questions? Happy to answer them, and I appreciate your tuning in at a weird time, and Let's see if there's any questions. Thank you for tuning in. And this has been Writing Wednesday in the middle of New York, and I lost my phone, so I was very happy to find it again. A tertiary character found it under a seat at a restaurant, and went and picked it up. And so this is coming to New York, and I'm all charged up. All right, take it easy. Bye.